The academy was shaped like a spiral of crystal and fire curling across the low orbit of Darwin 6, a neutral world. Known for its technological brilliance and its ruthless hierarchy, where status meant everything and deviation meant silence in the grand amphitheater of the learning halls, every species sat in clusters of their kind, their crests and colors proudly arrayed across long benches of shimmering alloy, but one seat always remained empty at the far edge of the second tier, stratum, and all knew why no one needed to say her name, for her presence struck a knees into even the most disciplined minds. She was of the Syrian bloodline, a royal house, shattered by rebellion, marked by exile, and stained by accusations of genetic impurity. Though none dared say such to her face, she bore the mask of an outcast on a world where legacy meant honor, and honor meant survival, and her bioluminescent skin flickered with unreadable thoughts. She sat every day in silence, her movements precise, her tools immaculate, her answers to professors always perfect, yet still the seat beside her stayed cold across 100 cycles. Even the janitorial drones adjusted their course to avoid that part of the bench, and she accepted it without a word, without a plea, without a glance of need, until the day the human arrived, late, as they often did, their reputation one of delay, but also of dangerous curiosity and deep empathy. His name was Kalen of Saul, just Kalen, because humans carried no crests and few titles, and their legacy was too young to be feared or revered. He was not built like the towering sewer or the sleek Philistines. Instead, he was weary, with hands stained by permanent grease, and a mind full of old world math, which he somehow made better by ignoring every galactic protocol. He stepped into the amphitheater, his tool belt clinking, and his eyes scanning the room until he saw what no one else saw: the empty place beside a girl with glowing skin and sharp eyes, and something older than the stars behind her. Silence. Without hesitation, without ceremony, he crossed the entire room and sat beside her, his legs awkwardly folding, his elbows resting wide, his data screen clutched like a stubborn pet. And he said nothing, not a greeting, not a question, not even a glance, and the hall froze like time had been clipped by gravity itself. She turned her head slowly, uncertain, perhaps even wary, but he only tapped his screen, adjusted a wire at his collar, and waited for the lecture to begin as if this were the most natural thing in the galaxy. And for the first time in 132 rotations, someone had shared breath and space with her without asking why, without asking if she wanted to be alone. He came again the next cycle, and the next, and the one after that, never late again, never loud, never full of the questions most asked of her, never curious in a dissecting way, but always present. Sometimes he brought small devices, broken things that hummed quietly, and repaired them during the long lectures. Sometimes he simply listened, arms folded. Sometimes he slept, which made her blink with something close to wonder. And slowly across those shared days, she began to move her tools half a breath closer. She began to hum low frequencies, barely audible, only detectable to those with keen sonic perception. And he responded with gestures, not words, offering her a circuit, once a tuning fork, twice a resistor, like gifts from an ancient tradition that no longer needed wrapping nor language. And the other students watched, always from afar, trying to decode the ritual that bloomed in silence and light between a girl of forbidden blood and a human who seemed not to care that she was alone before him, or feared by everyone after him. Their shared solitude became its own shield. And behind that invisible wall, she learned he was strange, brilliant, inconsistent, and completely unafraid of who she was. And in that courage, something ancient in her began to breathe. On the 95th cycle, he handed her a device he claimed was from Earth's early orbital history, a primitive flight stabilizer. Powered by gyroscopes and magnetic tension, she took it with both hands, nodding slightly, their version of thank you, and opened it with tools more delicate than any human eye could track. When she returned it 3 days later, it worked and played music from a forgotten Earth language, and they sat and listened beneath the gravitaries of the outer terrace. Sharing a moment older than either of their bloodlines, she began to reply to him not with words, but with action. Soldering a line on his broken wrist module, or correcting a line of his code with a gesture, he responded with sketches, rough and beautiful, of engine cores or alien wings, and once of her face, though he never showed her that sketch fully. He called her friend once, not aloud, but in the metadata of a shared blueprint where her identifier was marked as trusted node. And when she saw it, her breath caught in her throat, not from fear, not from duty, but because no one had called her that in years, not even her own kind. The attack came from within a corrupted faction of the academies. Security launched a sweep against unregistered legacies, those born from exiled lines or politically dangerous, her kind at the top of that list, though none would admit it aloud. She stood calmly as the armored figures entered the amphitheater, her wrist ready to be bound, her presence already marked for deletion, but then he stood too, Kalen of Saul, his hands raised, not in surrender, but in warning, and in his voice rang something the room had not heard before, not anger, not fear, but a calculation. An engineer's logic turned toward justice. He demanded due process, cited codes obscure and ancient, and backed it all with the working prototype of the station's own shield core, which he had rebuilt in secret and which now pulsed with unstable energy in his palm. He told them if they took her, they would destabilize the core's harmonic field, which he would no longer control, and in that pause and that hesitation, she stepped back into her seat, not as a fugitive, but as someone defended by the most unpredictable variable in the galaxy, a human who loved systems and silence more than conflict, and yet who would break a world if she was unjustly taken from it. They never spoke of that day again, but everyone remembered the moment. The seat was no longer cursed, no longer feared. Now, it was occupied by two, a pairing no algorithm could have predicted, no prophecy could name, one of fallen royalty, one of a rising people, both wrapped in oil and quantum threads, and slow blooming trust. They built together now, schematics that required no speech, theories that danced between human defiance and alien elegance, and they were asked often how they managed to work without conversation, without leadership, without structure, and always they would look at each other and say nothing, because the answer was the same as it had been from the beginning. He had sat beside her without a word, and in doing so, he had spoken more than any language ever could, and she had welcomed him with a smile, not with warmth, but with quiet and understanding. And that was how they changed everything, not with war, not with power, but by sitting beside one another when no one else dared, and letting the galaxy see what silence could build when it finally stopped being afraid.